Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Dr. Brent Siebold with Arizona State University, Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering. This is Make It Happen. I'm really excited. I've got my dear friend, John Valletta. He is an ASU Sun Devil through and through. He is a experienced engineer. He's an experienced innovator, and he's developed an amazing framework to help us all who want to make change in the world, really organize best practices in a way that can be drawn upon, reflected upon, and most importantly, acted upon. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce to all of you, John Valletta. John, thanks for coming today.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Morning, everybody. Just a little introduction to myself. I'm a third-generation Arizonan. We moved to Bisbee after my father died when I was 4 years old, and I was raised by my grandparents and a single mom. If you fast forward about 70 years, I'm a retired Navy captain and manager from the utility industry. I've had a lot of opportunities to experience many different roles, and I've developed my code to live by from my life's experience. And I think it could be quite helpful for everybody to really think through carefully what your code to live by is and strive to try to develop it and then obviously live it. So today we're going to talk about my code to live by. We'll look at a case study. We'll give you some ideas on how to develop your own code to live by, and then how to use a continuous improvement process for lifelong improvement of your code. Early in my career, I overheard someone ask a new manager, "What is your leadership style?" The response was, "You will see." At first, I thought this was kind of an arrogant response, but after some reflection, I realized that the manager really had no defined leadership style or code to live by. So if asked the same question, I would not have provided a very good response. So this experience was the incentive for me to develop my code to live by. I wanted to have a solid answer if anybody ever asked me that same question. My code to live by has served me well over the years. I owe any success I have to my code. It defines expectations for my team, but more importantly, it defines my expectations for myself. When assuming new leadership positions, I've always reviewed my code to live by with team members, and they, in fact, have appreciated having clear understanding of what my expectations are for the team. The code to live by my code to live by is composed of three components: work ethic, principles, a toolkit that you can use for all work tasks. So let's first take a look at what I mean by work ethic. So what is a work ethic? A work ethic is a set of values centered on the importance of work. And let me give you a couple of examples. In the Navy nuclear program, when I was on submarines as a young officer, having recently graduated, the work ethic was, if you can't get your work done in a 24-hour day, work nights. Kind of draconian, but that's the way it was. Another example is Dr. Hofer, University of California, Berkeley a philosophy professor, was a longshoreman. When referred to as intellectual, his response was, "No, I'm a longshoreman." So the first component is strategy. If you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. Always do what's right and ethical. And there are actually several strategies for each hat you wear: spouse, parent, child, friend, student, teacher, leader, follower, etc. The second component is teamwork. You really can't achieve anything great without the help of others. Teams need to be diverse. Perfection is an elusive, unachievable goal. And I always use the Pareto principle when you're looking for setting your goals. And Teams need to be diverse. Homogeneity often results in problematic outcomes. However, diversity can cause conflict due to differences in values. And diversity requires careful team leader attention. Be tenacious to strive for high quality in everything you do. Carefully define quality. Perfection is an elusive, unachievable goal, as I mentioned. Use the Pareto principle. And by that, I mean achieving goodness requires only about 20% of the effort to achieve perfection. Then use continuous improvement to approach perfection as time goes on. Now, these three elements form the rules for a work ethic. And notice that teamwork and quality of daily work hold up strategy. And without either one, the strategy will fail. So in summary, on work ethic, do the right thing, do the best you can with the time available, and show people you care. Now, the work ethic rules sit on a platform that's held up with 4 pillars. It's kind of like the pillars that that are used in a soft soil to hold up a building. And the first pillar is speak with data. Have an objective basis for what you do and say. If you don't know, say so. It's okay to speculate, however, clearly acknowledge the hypothetical nature of what you say. Data collection is essential to evaluate performance and make decisions. The second pillar is customer focus. In addition to the external customers, you really have internal customers. And those internal customers are the next person in the process. Every task and every interaction involves a customer service provider relationship, even in personal relationships. And sometimes the roles reverse. Sometimes they can shift back and forth. Be sure you really know who your customers are. For example, in a classroom, who's the customer? The learning experience improves if students understand the bilateral nature of the two roles. When on a team, the customer service provider roles drift around, and members of successful teams understand this bilateral nature. Now, the third pillar is respect for people. And a real good thumb rule is seek first to understand rather to be understood. Now, the lack of respect is the root cause of many of the social problems that we're facing today in today's environment. Without respect, the teamwork and customer pillars crumble. The simple things count the most, such as showing up for time and starting meetings up on time. The fourth pillar is continuous improvement. Continuous improvement needs to be built into innovations. Good software engineers understand the concept. The product is launched as soon as possible. Upgrades are implemented to both kill bugs and improve customer satisfaction. And you also need to embrace failures as opportunities for future success. However, it's more efficient to learn from the mistakes of others to mitigate the potential of unanticipated failures on any kind of task or innovation you undertake. Now, continuous improvement needs maybe a little bit more in-depth explanation. Continuous improvement is really a recursive plan, do, check, act cycle for the entire product life cycle. I use product in the general sense to include innovation, software, hardware, laws, regulation, procedure, policies, and your own skill and knowledge. During the development phase, we use the plan do steps. During planning, establish database performance measures to gauge success during operations. Conduct a potential problem analysis to ferret out adverse consequences and who the consequences could affect. And you modify your plan to mitigate the potential adverse consequences you uncover. The do is where you actually implement your plan. During the operations phase, check monitors the implementation using the established performance measures. If performance falls short of expectations, ACT identifies areas for improvement. Start the process over by planning enhancements, and then just continue the cycle as your product's out on the market, and you continue to improve the customer satisfaction of your product. Now, too often, the cycle is broken after the plan-do development phase. Innovators throw the product over the fence for the users to assume responsibility for results. Laws are passed and never checked to verify that desired result was achieved. Users have problems that developers ignore, so don't alienate your customers by ignoring the continuous improvement loop. The continuous improvement process can be built into the strategy. And continuous improvement can evolve a good strategy towards perfection. And this approach facilitates rapid implementation, that Brent mentioned while I was working on my presentation. And the approach facilitates implementation quickly while still planning for unanticipated problems post-implementation. Now, Dr. Crow defines continuous improvement in a slightly different area. And he refers to it as lifelong learning for you as an individual. So you as an individual is the product in the continuous improvement loop. So use the continuous improvement process to improve your skills, knowledge, and be curious. Questions on continuous improvement and the work ethic?
This is great stuff, John. Thank you so much. I just want to remind everybody, we pasted into chat a set of worksheets that John has created to provide an opportunity for you to leverage these frameworks moving forward. So if you haven't seen the chat, go ahead and click on the link and feel free to download and edit your own version of these worksheets. But before John continues, yes, any comments, questions, reflections? The quiet group. It's a quiet group today, John. Let's just keep moving, and hopefully some of this stuff is powerful enough to be leveraged here in the near future.
Okay, so let's move on. So here's my work ethic and the continuous improvement loop, and we'll put your questions on chat, and we can come back and clarify or answer questions or discuss it a little bit later on. Okay, so in my code to live by, we've discussed the work ethic, and so next let's move on to forces that I refer to as principles, which will help you with your work ethic. So principles. What are principles? Principles are a chain of reasoning to achieve goals. My principles have evolved over time, and they have served me well and will do the same for you. Some organizational design consultants might refer to principles as core values. I like principles. It's simpler, but use the language that resonates with you. Now, for every task, apply your principles. And the first is a positive attitude. Jesse Jackson first said, it's your attitude and not your aptitude that determines your altitude. One caution: don't let a positive attitude be so strong that it leads to arrogance or closed-mindedness and compromised ethics. Be self-critical, and there's no conflict with having a positive attitude and being self-critical. The next principle is intensity. Do things with class. Why is the packaging for Apple products so fancy? Why are there no screws? Why are there so many fonts? And why do these attributes mean so much to Apple? Don't cut corners. Intensity provides for focus on the purpose and priority of your strategies. Invest time, don't spend it. Now, one caution: the Pareto 80-20 rule helps me avoid the trap of focusing on perfection. It also provides time for working on other strategic goals. It helps holding back on making innovations happen as soon as possible. Dr. Brent is pretty passionate about this, as he mentioned earlier. And then I use continuous improvement to move towards perfection. And so that's kind of a summary of intensity. Now, tenacity. You need to be persistent. You need to expect setbacks and problems, but just suck it up and move on. The idea stage is fun, but getting to the end requires tenacity. Now, there are some interrelations between the principles. Positive attitude is absolutely essential to be tenacious and intense in your approach to work. Now, simplicity. The best solutions are the simplest solutions. I've always found a simpler way. Sometimes it takes a while to figure it out, but you can find a simpler way. I did add 2 qualifiers to my principles recently based on what we've seen with this COVID pandemic, and I added sustainable and systemic, and they put simplicity into a better context, I think. And a caution on simplicity. Don't let striving for simplicity compromise safety, reliability, or ethics. And we'll talk about that a little later on. Now, simplicity is also important. Don't get yourself hung up on being so intense in getting your product to be perfect that you sacrifice safety and reliability. And the Pareto principle helps here too. So you can look, just keep in mind that you get 80% of the benefit from 20% of the effort. So accountability, you need to own the results of your work, either success or failure. I make mistakes, but I don't let tenacity, intensity, or positive attitude fade. I just suck it up and move on. You also need to help others to avoid your own mistakes. You should be accountable for passing on the lessons that you've learned over time. Now, follow-up. Unfortunately, people drop the ball on their obligations to follow through on commitments. And I long ago got over it. I assume the responsibility to follow up on commitments, whoever has them, including service providers, myself, and my customers. Now, tenacity and accountability are related to follow-up. Accountability is the flip side of follow-up. I try to be tenacious in fulfilling my obligations without the need for someone to remind me. However, I never assume others will do the same. I accept the fact that others may slip on their obligations and follow up with them. Follow-up is sometimes an unpleasant necessity, and you'll need some tenacity to kind of get over it and continue to follow up and make sure that commitments that owed to you are actually carried out. Level 1 is a kind of a project management concept. It's kind of a recursive to-do list. Have a few level 1 tasks designated to implement strategy. Write them down. Use the level 1 to schedule a review of performance. Now, here are a few more interrelationships. Level 1 needs to be simple. If it starts to get complicated, then break it down into level 2 or level 2 to 3 subtasks. Again, the Pareto 80-20 rule works here. And the level 1 also helps me to manage my own obligations and to follow up actions committed to by others. Now, these are my principles within my code to live by, and you need to ask yourself, what are my principles? Questions or comments on principles before we move on?
Yeah, I have one. I threw it in the chat too, but I'll say it out loud. I'm wondering, so these are fantastic principles, and they also kind of appear to be like aspirational principles. Obviously, you have a wealth of experience, and you know, throughout your career, you arrived to these. So would you say that there's kind of the ideal set of principles that, you know, any entrepreneur should aspire to? Or do we have some flexibility and wiggle room to work out our own principles?
Well, now that's a good point, and I must have kind of overlooked it. These are my principles, and I think you need to develop your own principles. I think you could certainly feel free to start with mine, because I've developed these over time, and they are aspirational. During this last, and I'll talk about this in a little bit later on, during this summer Make It Happen session, I listened to a number of them, and I actually picked up several things, and I've actually modified my principles. So you'll never really approach perfection. And again, use the Pareto 80-20 rule. You definitely should have a positive attitude, tenacity. You need to just be tenacious in going after what you want, and you have to be intense and continue to focus on your goal. You need to have things simple. You need to follow up on yourself and others that owe you things, and you need to be accountable to your performance. And the level one, if you don't write it down and have a list of things to do, you kind of get off track. So you're absolutely right. You could change the verbiage on these things. Somebody might want to put tenacity and intensity together in their own mind. So this is my set of principles. You're welcome to start with them, and you'll never get there, but you can always continue to strive in your striving for continuous improvement to improve them. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Anything else before I go on? Okay, let's move on to the next to the next piece of my code to live by. Now that we've talked about the work ethic and the principles that are instilled in your being, you'll need to have a set of tools to implement, to apply and accomplish your work tasks. Now, I'm only going to introduce these today because actually they all each need probably a considerable amount of time to cover. But let's do a quick summary. Okay, so what's a toolkit? It's a personal set of resources, abilities, and skills. And there are actually 3 toolkits. A universal toolkit that is composed of business planning, which brings an innovation to market. Training is needed for team members and customer development. Communications enables clear, concise, precise, efficient, and appropriate messages. Separate communications tools are needed for presentations in various venues. Efficient business writing, video conferencing, blogs, websites, social media, etc. Communication skills are extremely important. And each one of these areas that I mentioned requires some thought and practice. Interviewing skills are needed to interact with customers to find out what their needs are. You need to be able to interview for selection of team members and service providers and for self-promotion. Team building skills are needed basically for efficiency, because teamwork is one of the work rules. Change management develops team members and customer acceptance of innovation. Problem analysis finds performance analysis finds human error root causes and corrective actions. And problem analysis finds hardware or software or process or procedure failures and identifies the root cause and corrective action. The next toolkit is a technical toolkit. And these technical tools are plug and play. They're kind of like an all-terrain, multi-purpose toolkit that kind of applies to any kind of a technical aspect of whatever you're doing. The innovation checklist unleashes entrepreneurial strength. The system approach forces structure. Denormalization provides for innovation under constraint. Customer focus finds customer needs even if they're latent. And that's the hard part, finding the latent customer needs. Modeling structures thinking about a problem. Lifelong learning sets past success and new skills and knowledge as a starting point. It's particularly appropriate today where we're finding a lot of transformational changes in everything we do. So you need to keep on top of what the transformational changes are to help yourself identify opportunities, and there are some tools to do that. Transformation and exchangeability maximizes the adapting of existing technologies to something that you might want to do or innovate. Simplicity avoids the entropy of complexity. We talked about simplicity before, but there are some tools to do that. Prototyping enables test-driven development, particularly with your customers. And efficiency and reliability promotes sustainable customer loyalty. It's a technical toolkit. Okay, and the third toolkit, which is important, before we move on, let me give you one example of the technical toolkit. It's the innovation checklist. And this checklist was developed by George Helmer, a former Defense Advanced Research Project Agency manager. And he developed a simple but powerful go, no-go tool. And remember, simple is best. So let's go through it real quick. So what are you trying to do? And be able to state it with no jargon. How's it done today? What are its limits? What's new in your approach? Why will it be successful? Who cares and what difference will it make? What are the risks and payoffs? How much will it cost and how long will it take? And what are the midterm exams to verify success? Very simple tool when you've got an innovative idea. You need to go through this and make sure you really have solid basis for moving forward with your actual innovation. Okay, so then the final set of tools are the discipline tools, and those are the tools that you're developing in courses of formal study and your degree programs. Questions on discipline kit? Okay, just summarize. So we got the universal tools, the technical tools, the discipline kit, and you'll find over your career that the universal tools and technical tools become actually more important to success than the discipline toolkits that you fill up early in your career. And notice then that it's going to be your own lifelong learning, not your formal education, that will be required to develop the required skills and knowledges in using these universal and technical tools. Dr. Brent's work at ASU is beginning to correct this situation, and he can maybe fill us in a little bit more after I finish. But ASU is starting to pursue developing the entrepreneurial mindset, and really the entrepreneurial mindset uses the universal and technical tools. So I think any questions, comments?
This is great. Thanks for the shout out, John. I appreciate that.
Okay, let's move on really quick. I want to go through here's my code to live by. Here's the work ethic, principles. I'm just going to put it all together. The toolkit, and using continuous improvement to, as we just talked a few minutes ago, these are all aspirational. So you need to use the continuous improvement loop to refine them and approach a set that really works effectively for you. Again, comments, questions on any of these or how they relate to one another? Okay, so let's move on. I'd like to go through a quick case study. So what you don't want to repeat the mistakes of those who go before you. It'll kind of ruin your whole day. You want to use the experience of others to develop and modify your code to live by. Now, it's important to get things out there and fail and be able to deal with failure, but you really want to try to avoid failure as much as possible. Now, this case study illustrates the power of a code to live by. The picture shows at the opening day in July 1940 of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And it was actually an innovation in its time. It was an innovative approach to building bridges. Now, shortly after it opened, even in the slightest breeze, the bridge would move up and down about 5 feet. And the bridge got its name, the Gallop and Gertie. And what was interesting, traffic was still allowed on the bridge. It became a tourist attraction. And people could actually experience a roller coaster ride in their own car. Can you believe it? It's amazing. Okay, so November 7th, 1940, now this is 3 months after the bridge opened. A different breeze from a different angle came up and the bridge started to twist. Notice the car on the bridge. You can see the twisting of the bridge. So the wind and the light flexible structure created a structural positive feedback that resulted in a complete failure of the bridge. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge didn't have to collapse. It really was a failure of those involved with building, engineering, and construction to have an effective code to live by. And let me explain a little further. So using the root cause analysis, a very simple root cause analysis tool is to ask why 5 times. Now, the first question is, why did it fail? The technical cause was the deck design. You can see that on the left there. The deck design was the innovative part of this bridge. And it used a simpler plate stiffening system to build the bridge, and it was a lot easier to build, quicker, less expensive, etc. Now the Brooklyn Bridge, which was built 60 years before, and the Golden Gate Bridge that was built about 3 years before used a truss structure. And the new bridge, the replacement bridge, which is actually what this picture is, used that same structure. Now the proposed design was the one on the right here. The as-built design was this different stiffening structure. Now, the second why question was why was the truss deck stiffening not used? And therein lies the root cause. The as-built design had a had a 30% lower cost than the originally proposed truss design. And so really, this is the root cause. The root cause was it was a cost issue. So now, how does this case study relate to my code to live by? I reviewed the official report on the failure in a number of articles published over the decades following the collapse. And this diagram shows the contributing causes mapped onto my code to live by work ethic. Notice every single work ethic component had a problem. And I'm not going to go into these details. I'll just give you a second here to quickly scan them. Okay, so now let's take a look at principles. I did the same thing. Excuse me. I mapped the failures on my set of principles, and you can see same thing. Now, the two in pink, these two are kind of interesting. The engineer was overconfident. The engineer was overconfident and really didn't listen and didn't consider the fact that his design might not work too well. And the simpler design was pursued, really kind of the flip side of simplicity, but that simpler design wasn't technically sound and wasn't tested. Again, I'm not going to go into detail. You can kind of you can look at what's here. This case study is a classic. It's taught in physics classes, some structural engineering classes, and there's a lot of material on it if you want to pursue it a little further. But the point is that this is a good case study for here was an innovation that was implemented without following a good code to live by, and it resulted in a catastrophic failure. Luckily, no one was hurt. The only casualty was a dog that was trapped in that car that was on the bridge that I showed you. Okay, so let's move on to your code to live by. Use the continuous improvement process to develop your code, and also use it to kind of tweak your code to live by as you grow and learn from others. Again, the question on aspirational, and that's a very good point. So you really want to continue, get the code out there, start using it, find out how successful it's been or not been, and modify it. So develop your code to live by. And you can use my code as a starting point. It's got 40 years of experience, and you can customize it to make it more meaningful to you. You can feel free to contact me and discuss it more. I'll critique your code if you want, whatever I can do to help you out. Then you need to live your code. And this is going to take some positive attitude and tenacity, part of the principles, obviously, to make your code part of your being. And it will be the first major test of your principles to try to pull it off. Then you want to evaluate your code. And you want to use your own experiences, mistakes, and failures and learnings from others to do that. And then in doing so, then you want to identify areas for refinement in your code, and then start the whole thing back over again by using the plan step to refine your code. And it just continues to go on forever. Now, let me go through a little bit more detail on the kind of check act phase and how to go about doing that. And I'll use an example that I mentioned, I sort of introduced a couple of minutes ago. During the summer Make It Happen session, I sat in on a number of them, and I took notes, and I took the notes and I mapped them onto my code to live by. We talked about this a little earlier. I showed you this a little earlier. And so here's what I found. So I used the continuous improvement process on my code to live by to both validate it and to see if I could tweak it and make it a little bit better. Okay, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but the yellow notes are notes that basically were presented by Professor Bacalzo that are totally consistent with my code to live by. I did pick up a couple of things, and the dean mentioned that he considers the customer as being a team member. I never really thought about that too much. He also talked about crowdfunding and part of your business planning, and he talked about using prototyping to put something in the hands of the customer in the environment where it would be used. So, okay, similar. Rick Letweiler talked about goodness. He said when you use intensity to develop your strategy, to focus on your strategy, don't focus on achieving perfection. Focus on goodness to get the product out, and then post-launch, move it towards perfection. Okay, here's Gabe talked about controlling self-doubt and being decisive, which I kind of rolled into these two principles of positive attitude and tenacity. And Eric, who's the librarian, the engineering librarian, he talked about using the librarian as a team member. And he also, I picked up, I didn't realize this was available. There's a lot of research available on customer needs, and you can use that as you start to figure out which of the customer needs on, say, transformational technologies you want to go after for your innovation. And finally, Jackie Roberts hit on almost every one of my code to live by principles. She calls my pillars operational standards. I thought her idea on using video conferencing for all remote communications rather than conference calls was excellent, and I thought involving employees in the hiring process an enhancement to my interviewing tool set. So that's how I use the feedback loop to improve my code to live by. Now, there's some worksheets that are in the chat. There's a link in the chat. And so here's how I recommend that you go about this. Use a separate take this worksheet and use a separate worksheet for each of the Make It Happen sessions you participate in. And identify the learnings from each of the talk that relate to the code to live by. Check off the appropriate box, wherever it is, and then draw a line from the note to whatever the tool or principle or work ethic is. And then in the future, you can use you can use the worksheet for other learning experiences, courses and things like that that you go to. Okay, there's another worksheet, and that's a worksheet for, there's another 3 worksheets actually. And you take these worksheets and you take one set for each Make It Happen session. And after the session, pull out of the notes those that apply to, say, the work ethic. Write them down and draw an arrow to the appropriate area. And do the same thing for the principles and the same thing for the tools. And after the last session, you can use the results on these 3 worksheets and it's basically your code to live by. And feel free, as you're listening to the sessions, to add ideas that you have from your own experiences. Now, the worksheets, again, they're available on Google Docs. So you need to find your own code to live by and make it happen. Questions?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate all the time and energy clearly you spent on putting these materials together. I know the students that are here with us respect that level of thought and work and caring more than anything. So on behalf of everyone here, thanks to John. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and then we'll get into some Q&A as your schedules allow.